So the first module is really biochemistry, and it basically looks at all the molecules that make up living organisms. So this is called bond making and bond breaking, because everything is controlled in your body by really two reactions: hydrolysis reaction and condensation reaction, which affects all bonds of biological molecules. So this bit here is just a bit of a recap, really. I'm not going to spend time on this because I don't have long enough on the video, but you should have hopefully done chemistry at GCSE, or at least trilogy, and you would have done about alkanes and alkenes and the sort of formula of them. So here you've got a carbon molecule. Now the carbon molecule has what we call a valency of 4, which means it can form 4 covalent bonds, okay, whereas the hydrogen molecule here only has a valency of 1, which means it can only form 1 covalent bond, and that will be quite important later on into the course. But obviously, if you don't understand that, it would be worth you just looking back at your alkanes and alkene structures. So then let's start off then. So biochemistry and metabolism. Basically, you are what you eat. Okay, so 2 things happen to your food. First of all, your food could be obviously digested. Okay, now if your food is digested, one of 2 things happens. So if you remember the term for digestion at GCSE, it was to break down large insoluble molecules into small soluble molecules, so they could be absorbed into your bloodstream. So imagine you went to lunch and you had a turkey burger. Okay, that turkey burger wouldn't appear in your arm as a piece of turkey. Instead, the protein has been broken down into amino acids, and then those amino acids have been rebuilt into the proteins that you need in your body. The other thing that can happen is a lot of that turkey burger wouldn't be rebuilt. What would happen is it would be broken down and it would be used in respiration for energy, and that energy is to provide drive metabolism. And if you remember from GCSE, you don't need to know much about metabolism at GCSE, but metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions that happen either in your cell, if you're looking at one cell, or in your body. Now, the food that isn't digested comes under the term fibre. Now, fibre really is cellulose. So whenever you eat plant material, it's obviously the cellulose cell wall in every plant cell is fibre. And fibre isn't digested. So the question at the bottom says, well, why is fibre so vital for your diet? Because it's a common little question that people don't think about. Well, fibre is vital because, yes, like at GCSE, you would have said it keeps you regular. But also, it's really important in maintaining a healthy gut. Because, for example, when you digest and when you leave the stomach, when the food leaves the stomach, if you remember, you release bile salts. And from GCSE, you would have been told that bile salts or bile emulsifies fat, okay, bringing a larger surface area for the enzymes to work on, the lipase to work on. It also neutralizes stomach acid. Well, the bile salts, however, if they build up in your intestines, they actually become toxic, and they can damage cells and cause mutations and lead to colon cancer or bowel cancer. Now, this is obviously not a great thing. So if you have a low fiber diet, you will increase your risk of developing bowel cancer. So what we say is that a low fiber diet is this term here, this risk factor for colon cancer. Now, having a risk factor doesn't mean that you are going to definitely develop colon cancer. So for example, if we think about something else, if we think about skin cancer, okay, skin cancer can obviously be caused by a number of things. So if you develop skin cancer later on in life, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have been exposed to too much UV radiation from the sun. It could be that you've just had a random mutation. It could be that you've been smoking all your life and that's caused a mutation. It could be lots of different factors that could cause you to get that type of cancer. So whilst there's a risk factor, in this case low fiber diet is a risk factor for colon cancer, there's a correlation between the two. It doesn't necessarily mean that the low fiber diet always causes every case of colon cancer. So here we go. So this is just something that you don't really need to memorize, but I think it's quite useful just to introduce it. So At GCSE, you would have talked about something called biomass, and biomass is the total amount of living material in your body. So if you look at this example here, you've got 30% of your body is actually just your biomass. So 30% is all the chemicals that make you up, whereas the other 70% is just water. So if I weigh about, I don't know, 75 kilograms, okay, 30% of me is living material. The other 70%, sorry, is water. So if you were to put me in an oven and let me dry out and sort of over a few days, leave me to dry out, obviously I'd die. But that you would end up eventually with just 30%. If all the water was able to evaporate from my body, you'd end up with 30%. So think about that, 75 kilograms is my sort of mass. So that means I'd be, what, 15, 20, yeah, so 22.5 kilograms would be my overall mass, and that would be my biomass, okay? And my biomass is made up of the following things. So my biomass is made up of 15% is protein, okay? So all the muscles or your bones, your enzymes are all protein. RNA, which you won't even know what that is at the minute, but is involved in protein synthesis, making proteins, is 6%. Lots of other small molecules, 4%. Polysaccharides, which is glycogen in humans, so energy storage, would be 2%. Phospholipids, which make up your cell membranes, are only 2%. And your DNA, this massive important thing that codes for your entire body, is only 1%. Now, interesting though, if you took all of those molecules and you took them apart and said, well, what actually makes up this molecule of DNA? What makes up this bit of cellulose? It would only actually generally be 4 atoms. Carbon, which makes up everything, as you read to find out. Hydrogen, which we've already just talked about. Oxygen, which you wouldn't be surprised about, and then things like proteins particularly have nitrogen in them, and they make 99% of all these chemicals up in your body. So we're actually very simple if you think about it in terms of our complexity of what our ingredients are. It's just how they're stuck together is obviously quite important. So carbon is the molecule of life. And the reason that carbon is the molecule of life is because of what I said earlier about this valency of 4. So if you look at each carbon molecule here, this carbon molecule's got 1, 2, 3, 4 covalent bonds, 4 strong covalent bonds, as you'll be told at GCSE, that can combine to other things. So what this means is that carbon, because it has these 4 strong covalent bonds, tends to be the what we call the backbone of all living materials. So we have long chains of carbon that other molecules can stick onto. So that sort of answers that question for you there. Okay, the carbon is that long sort of backbone you can see here on this diagram, can form a long chain, and because of that long chain, other molecules can attach to it. So it means even something like DNA, the majority of DNA is made of sugars, which is carbon molecules, and bases, which have got carbon molecules in them. We said before what valency means. So carbon has got this valency of 4, meaning that it can join up to 4 other molecules or make 4 bonds. That isn't always for different molecules. It could be something along these lines. So carbon dioxide, for example, okay, which is obviously quite an important gas these days. When we look at global warming, we also look at photosynthesis. That would be your carbon dioxide molecules. So you've got 2 oxygen molecules with a double covalent bond to 1 carbon. So you still see there's 4 bonds there, showing the carbon has got a valency of 4, okay, but it's just used in a different way. And we also need to know, we're used to knowing what other valencies there are. So here you can see carbon dioxide again, as I was saying, and you can see the oxygen molecules each has a valency of 2, okay, and that is useful to remember because obviously most things remember oxygen. And if we look at nitrogen and hydrogen together, so at GCSE you should have done in chemistry about ammonia, which is NH3, okay. So if you remember this example, it will always give you all the valencies. So carbon's got a valency of 4, oxygen's got valency of 2, and then you can see here I'm just adding on the valency for hydrogen. Okay, there we go. So now you can see hydrogen always has a valency of 1, and nitrogen has a valency of 3. And I'd recommend that you learn those. Even though you're not likely to be tested on them in an A-level exam, it will help you with drawing any structures for this entire module on biological molecules. Okay, so then we get to the next bit, which is just introducing these two terms, monomers and polymers. So again, something you probably did in GCSE chemistry. A lot of this early module feels very chemistry based, but it does get quite interesting and quite developing. If you're not doing A-level chemistry, please don't give up at this point. So basically, monomers are individual units. Okay, so we've got over here, we've got individual monomers, which are individual blocks. So they could be individual glucose molecules, for example, or individual amino acids in proteins. Okay, and these monomers will stick together to make polymers. So they'll stick together and have bonds form between them. And these are normally covalent bonds in biological molecules, and we'll talk about those as we sort of go forward. Now, the next thing. Sorry, there's a break there. The next thing that you need to do is know what a polymer is. So polymers are a repeating unit of monomers, okay, with bonds between us, as just said. But if you have a look at the examples that you need to know, you need to understand, well, what polymers and monomers are carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acid. And there isn't one for lipids, which is a bit different. So if we start off with it, the monomers, so carbohydrates are your sugars. Think of them like that for the moment. Okay, or your polysaccharides as we call them. So the monomers of a carbohydrate, are glucose. Okay, there could be other ones as well, but the main one we'll look at A level is glucose. And glucose sticks together. There's alpha and beta, which we'll talk about next time. But glucose sticks together to make starch, glycogen, and also underneath the video that I'm on, it also says cellulose, the cell walls. Okay. Proteins, you should know about protein monomers because proteins are digested into making monomers of amino acids from GCSE, you should know that. And the polymer is protein, but we don't call it just protein. And the reason we don't call it protein is because actually one protein, so if we say hemoglobin, for example, in your red blood cells, is made up of 4 individual chains of something called polypeptides. So the monomer for a protein is amino acid, which makes the polymer a polypeptide, but there might be many polypeptides that make protein. Okay, then we've got nucleic acid. Okay, and nucleic acid is your DNA and RNA, and that is made up of something called nucleotide, which you hopefully should know at from GCSE. Now, the last bit is a lipid isn't a polymer because it's made up of 2 different molecule types, so it's not a repeating chain. So if you remember from GCSE, digestion of lipids turned into glycerol and fatty acids. Well, because glycerol and fatty acids are different molecules, you can't call them a polymer. And the last bit then, and it's probably the most important slide, is this. So all molecules can be broken down or made up using 2 different reactions. Okay, so if we imagine this could be molecule 1 here, could be like a sugar molecule or something, or a protein. Okay, we want molecule 1 to stick to molecule 2. So if they're both sugar molecules or they're both proteins or something like that. And on the edge of molecules, often there are hydroxyl groups. So you can see here we've got an OH group, and on the other molecule we've got an OH group. Okay, now what that's going to do is allow us to take out some other molecules and form a bond. So here you see, if I get rid of that for a second, get rid of that, you can see you've got OH and OH hydroxyl groups. Well, if you look where that blue line is dotted, what that's showing you is when these two come close together and the enzyme comes along, the enzyme can take out H2O. Get it? H2O, a water molecule. So a water molecule can be removed. Now, if a water molecule is being removed, what that will leave us with is 1, and it doesn't matter which oxygen goes from either side, it will leave us with 1 oxygen molecule. Now that oxygen molecule, if you remember, has a valency of 2. So now it's got a spare bond, and it will want to join up to this molecule over here. So if you look at the bottom, this is the after molecule picture, okay, and it goes from being 2 individual atoms to 1 joined up molecule, or 2 molecules, I should say, to 1 joined up molecule with an oxygen linking up. So because we've taken a water molecule out to do that, we call that a condensation reaction. So if you think about it, if I am breathing out, okay, if I was to breathe on the screen, for example, there'd be condensation on there. Okay, now that is because I'm losing water from my body. So if you remember it that way, condensation, when you take water out of your body, it's also condensation when you take water out of molecules in a reaction. And it forms this new covalent bond, which is made with the oxygen with a valency of 2 in the middle. Okay, and this is how we always join two smaller molecules to make a larger molecule. Now, when I go on to the next bit then, if I go on and then break that molecule down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and break that molecule down by adding a water molecule. So if you look over this side, okay, if I want to break the bond, I take that water molecule, okay, and I basically insert the water molecule back into that oxygen. And what that does is it basically takes me back up there. So by inserting the water molecule back in, okay, I'm basically putting another hydrogen sort of here, so I make the OH bond again, okay, and then another OH there, and I split the bond up again. And whenever we break a bond, we call it a hydrolysis reaction. So if you think about it, every digestion reaction you've ever talked about at GCSE, whether it's proteins being broken down into amino acids, lipids being broken down into glycerol and fatty acids, that would have been a hydrolysis reaction. And if you think about it, if I drink some water, I am hydrolyzing, I'm hydrating my body. So it's a hydrolysis reaction. And we'll go over that quite a few times, as hydrolysis is always how we break molecules apart. So digestion primarily is an example of a hydrolysis reaction. Doesn't matter what you're digesting, and when you're growing, taking two small molecules and sticking them together, it is this example of a condensation reaction. So I hope that's been useful. That's episode 1 done, and I'll see you soon. Just going to leave you with some questions if you want to have a go at these, or just replay it and see what you can remember.